Hi, and welcome to another episode of WFCF TV, the Florida Chamber Foundation's video podcast. I want to thank you for spending some time with us as we greet and welcome the chair of the Florida Chamber Foundation, Jane Adams, who's Vice President at the University of Florida in University Relations. Jane, thanks for taking time with us.
Thank you so much. I'm glad to be here.
In fact, we probably, if I were a smarter person, would have started the podcast series out with our chair, but you're gracious and let us get a couple under our belt to make sure that we knew what we were doing and before we brought you in. Jane, give us a sense, when we talk to other people, and we of course want to talk about the foundation. I don't think that the University of Florida needs a whole lot of explanation of what it's doing, but what is the University of Florida's interest in something like the Florida Chamber Foundation? That might puzzle a couple of folks of why you make the investment both personally and professionally in our organization.
Right. I can tell you that the University of Florida has three missions. It's education, research, and service. And I think when we take a look at all three of those areas, there are implications for the Florida Chamber of Commerce Foundation. For example, in research, we do a lot of tech transfer, and obviously economic development is an important thing to the state and to the Florida Chamber Foundation. Service is another area that's important to us, and we want to be involved in critical leading thinking in the state of Florida. And clearly this is an organization that is looking to the future, long-term planning, fills a nice niche within the state in terms of coming up with where we need to be by the year 2030, and University of Florida can help a lot in what the state becomes in its future, and so it's a good opportunity for us to plug in and get involved.
Okay, well, and that makes sense. And if you think about the 6 pillars framework itself, although we're supposed to tell folks that there's no pillar that's any more important than the other, there's no mistaking and there's no accident that talent, supply, and education is the first of the 6 pillars that we focus on. So again, that overlap probably is considerable, and again, grateful for the investment that you all make both in time and resources. Let's talk about the 6 pillars. The program seems to have taken off quite a bit. We have, as a foundation, really stepped up our initiative in the last 18 months. But from your perch, again, both at the University of Florida and as our chair, what are some observations you have about what's happened in the last 18 months or so?
I have been so impressed with how well the organization and the plan has been received in the state. When you take a look at all the people who are involved in the caucuses, steering committee members as well as those who participate in other ways, there's a lot of interest, and I was particularly pleased to see how it's been received in the state on the local level, and the number of 6-pillar communities that are starting to surface, people who are interested in buying into our process and how we look at the state in terms of the 6 pillars. And I think that's an incredible statement for the Chamber and the Chamber Foundation, is that there's an incredible demand out there, as we've seen, and we are filling that demand. So I'm very proud to be a part of this effort.
Good. Well, that is good to hear, and I think that you're spot on. I think one of the things that we would point to is that as we remind people interested in becoming a 6 pillars community and adopting the framework, is that this is not Tallahassee telling local and regional folks how to do things, but rather offering a common framework that allows multiple conversations to happen, to take place throughout the state, but then pulling them together in a state plan. Right. Speaking of a state plan, we know that the folks at the newly created DEO, which is the Department of Economic Opportunity, formerly known as OTED, and the EFI leadership, Grace Swope having come from Mississippi and getting his legs underneath him, considerable pressure for them to write that planning and all that good stuff, not a strategic plan necessarily, but the business plan as DEO is implemented. Any observations you have about that dynamic? Anything you've heard about how things are going, or your expectations for that whole DEO transition?
It's from a personal point of view, it's kind of interesting because I was working in the private sector for Walt Disney World when the Department of Commerce was changed from the Department of Commerce into Visit Florida, Enterprise Florida, and I forgot what the other leg of it was. But anyway, and was involved in the legislation, passing legislation, and moved from the Department of Commerce to those entities. But I think times change, needs change. And I think it makes sense that in this era where we really need to do economic development and grow and attract new businesses to the state, that I think the new structure will enhance that, make it easier, make the organizations able to move a little more quickly, to be a little more intentional in what they're doing. So I think it's a good thing, and I think the Florida Chamber Foundation has a wonderful opportunity to provide input and guidance and sort of take the thinking and the attitudes in the private sector in the state, as well as the universities and some nonprofits, and feed it into the DEO structure.
Interesting. Yeah, and again, good news just for the audience to know that there is that dialogue going on. Mark Wilson intimately involved in working with Grace Swope, and I've had some contact with them. Those folks, they are reaching out to the foundation, so we'll try to seize that opportunity. So one of the things I think I've got to ask you about, we've got you here, again, the connection, both you as the chair of the Florida Chamber Foundation, but also knowing that a priority coming out of the Talent Supply and Education Caucus was STEM.
Right.
And two elements. Let me give you, I guess, a lead question and then the follow-up at the same time. The lead question is, what are the priorities? And coming out of STEM, what does that mean for the state of Florida? Why is STEM such a big deal? And then my follow-up question to that is, why now? Why are we seemingly behind the 8 ball in STEM education in the state? So why is it so important, and why now?
Okay, I think it's important because as clearly as we move into the future and into the economy and the workplace, having scientific and technical background is very important. Increasingly important, much more so than it was, for example, when I was in college. We need to be globally competitive. We're looking at other places in the world that probably outperform us in terms of STEM education and students coming out with science and technology backgrounds, engineering and medical as well. And so if we want to be competitive, we just have to be better in those areas.
Talk for a second then about the challenges Florida will face to get there. Is this something that we wave a magic wand and boom, we're into STEM, or is there some heavy lifting to do?
No, pretty heavy lifting. One of the most interesting things is that the need, experts have predicted the need for STEM educated people into the future. And we're clearly, if we're going to have the sheer numbers that we need to have in order to be globally competitive, we're going to need to have more women and minorities graduating in STEM educations. And so there's a movement afoot. For example, the University of Florida is working with the Association of American Universities to identify ways that we can attract more women and minorities to STEM education in order to make sure we have enough people to fill the jobs and to fill the demand in the future.
Sure, very, very important. Again, connecting then not only the type of education but the diversity of the workforce is going to be critical for our state to move forward. Well, Jane, I want to thank you again, spending time with the chair of the Florida Chamber Foundation, Jane Adams, the University of Florida, Vice President of University Relations. And also want to remind everybody that is watching that if you'd like to read research about STEM education and the state of STEM in Florida and strategic planning that's going on to right that direction, if you will, you can find that on our website at www.flfoundation.org. You can also visit thefloridascorecard.com and get all kinds of education-related metrics that give you some sense of how we're doing as a state as we go forward in talent supply and education. Again, thanks for spending time with us, and we'll see you next time with another edition of WFCF TV, the Florida Chamber Foundation's video podcast.